Hi guys, in the last video we created our first activity in Pega. It's pretty simple, it only appends the current and upcoming 10 years to a list. This way we can have a dynamic dropdown in the billing information section. However, the introduction of this activity raised a severe guardrail warning in our application. As you may know, in Pega it is recommended to only use activities when it is absolutely necessary. In my case, I found it necessary because there is no out-of-the-box way, at least within a data transform, to append dynamically a set number of items into a list. But actually, there is an advanced solution for this problem. So what I want to do in this video is to get rid of the activity and instead use recursion to add items into the list using a data transform. You may already know about recursion from traditional programming. In simple terms, it's a function that calls on itself to resolve a problem. A classic example is calculating the factorial of a number. Here is the Python code. The function receives n, and the base case is when n is less than or equal to 1, and this stops the recursion. Otherwise, it multiplies n by the factorial of n minus 1. So when running this function with, say, 5, the recursion descends to the base case, then resolves in reverse order to compute the final result. So let me actually run through an example of, so in this case, what I want to know is the factorial of 5, right? So in this case, it is 120. But the way that we will do it with this function is as follows. So the first thing that we do is that we pass to factorial, this is factorial, the number 5. And what it will do is it will check if n, which is 5, is less than or equal to 1. Since it's not, then the result of this call is n, which is 5, times the factorial of n minus 1, which is going to be 4. And once again, it will check if it will call this function and it will check if n is less than or equal to 1. Since it's not, then else the result is going to be 4 times the factorial of n minus 1, which is going to be 3. And it will continue this way until it reaches the base case, which is n minus 1. Okay, so at this point, when we call f minus 1, it will check if it is indeed less than or equal to 1. Since it is, then it will return 1. So now we have reached our base case. So in this case, we know the result of factorial 1. So can we calculate this section? Yes, we can. So let me change the color. In this case, we know that this is equal to 1. So now we have 2 times 1. So the result of factorial 2 is going to be 2 times 1, which is going to be equal to 2. Then what is the factorial of 3? Well, it is going to be 3 times factorial of 2, which we already know that it is 2. So 3 times 2 is going to be 6. So that is the result of factorial of 3. Then we want to know the factorial of 4, which is going to be 4 times the factorial of 3, which we already know that it is 6. So in this case, it's going to be 24. And lastly, we want to know the factorial of 5, which we already know that is 5 times the factorial of 4, which is 24. So 5 times 24 is going to be 120. So that's how recursion works in programming. Now, what I want to do in our case is something very similar, but using functions. So what I want to have is my data page that is going to be calling a function, main data transform. And this data transform is going to be using a another data transform in which I want to use recursion. So what I want to do here is that I want to pass an n number, which is going to represent how many items I want to add into a list. This function is going to be responsible for appending items and it is going to be doing this by calling itself to append a new item. The only thing that I have to make sure that I have in place is one condition over here. So I want to check if n is less than or equal to 1. And also I want to make sure that I make n equal to n minus 1 before calling the function again, right? So before I do the recursive data transform call. So that's what I have in mind for the solution using recursion instead of an activity with data transforms. So let's get started. Okay, so let's get started by opening the data page, and we're going to change the data source to use a data transform. In my case, I'm going to call it add upcoming years. And this is going to be our main data transform. What this data transform is going to do is to call the recursive data transform, and then within this main data transform, we are going to use the logic to append the current year and the next X number of years. So let's apply a data transform, and what I'm going to do is to call it recursion add empty items. Now let's get started with our base case. In this case, what I want to do is to make sure that we don't go below 0. So let's get started by first having a parameter for n. I'm going to call it items count. So the base case is going to be when this parameter is less than or equal to 0. If that's the case, what I want to do is to exit the data transform so that we can end the recursion. If that's not the case, I want to add an otherwise, in which we are going to append a new item into our page list, which is going to be in px results. Then I want to make sure that I do an items count minus 1. And lastly, I want to call this function again so that it can add the next item. So if I try to save it, it is going to give me an error because of this step, because that transform doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to comment this step. Let's save and let's change it back to apply data transform. Okay, now let's come back to our main data transform and let's create a parameter, which is I'm going to call it years to add. It's going to be of type integer. And let's come back over here to this apply data transform. And let's make sure that we are passing this parameter. So let's save this and let's come back over here to our data page. And let's test this. Let's first add a parameter here that we are going to be using. Let's save. Let's pass it, actually. Save, and let's run. Let's try with Okay, something isn't working. So let's see what's happening. Oh, yes, I forgot. Let's pass the items to count this parameter. Let's try one more time. Okay, there it is. So now the next thing that I want to do is to make sure that I have the correct gears on each item. So let's do all of that over here. So the first thing that I want is to get the current year. So that function, we already did that in a previous video. Actually, I think I just closed it. Let me open it again, the activity. So here it is. This is the function that is going to give me the current year. So I'm going to just copy it and paste it over here. And the next thing that I want to do is to do for each page in px results. Let's make sure that I have it declared in pages and classes. So the class is going to be the same as this one. And here, for each page in, I want to do the expiration date here is going to be equal to something very similar to this. But here in this case, py for each count is going to be it's going to start at 1, so it's not going to take care of the first year, which is the current year. So what I'm going to do here is just do a -1 to make sure that it is work as it's supposed to. So let's click run. Let's try 11 so that we get the current year and the 10 next years. So here is 2025 and it should end in 2035. That seems to be working. So let's actually see if it works in the case. Okay, it is not working. We need to update the property. So let's refresh and let's see if that parameter shows. It shows, so I'm just going to add 11. Let's try one more time. Yeah, it is working. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.